Tom, where is the camera? Where is the online camera? Good evening, everybody. Is this working? Yeah. Good evening and welcome to this year's Galapagos Day event. I'm Charmian Keynes. I'm chair of the Galapagos Conservation Trust. And after the challenges of the last 2 years, it's wonderful that so many of you have actually joined us in person tonight. It's also excellent that we now have technology for others to join us online. So welcome to those of you around the world who I know are joining us at this moment. A couple of words on housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm does go off, for those in this room, could you please make your way to the nearest exit? There are green lights above it, and staff will direct you. I'd like to extend a special welcome to a few people right away. One of them is Lord Goldsmith, who is sitting here, and you will hear in a moment from him. He's the Minister for Asia, Energy, Climate and Environment, and he said there were no other things to mention. And we also have His Excellency, Mr. Sebastian Corral, the Ecuadorian Ambassador to the UK. And as I say, you'll hear from both of these gentlemen in a few moments. I'd also like to call out and welcome online the Ecuadorian Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Luis Vallas, who is joining us tonight too. He has a particular interest in our oceans work and is passionate in his fight against plastic pollution. Our thanks go next to all those who make our vital work in the Galapagos possible. And present tonight, there are some of our most valued funders from trusts, foundations, government agencies, along with corporate partners, Big Wild Thought, Crag Hoppers, and Rhyme and Reason, plus, of course, our many vital members in the audience. Thank you also to the companies that generously donated raffle prizes, particularly EcoVentura, who've donated a wonderful 7-night Galapagos cruise as first prize. The form's inside your program, and while prices everywhere seem to be rising, I do believe our raffle still offers fantastic value for money. It's just £2 for a ticket, and that price has not changed. You can buy tickets up until the end of tonight's event. So what's going to happen tonight? We're going to have GCT's president, Monty Halls, hosting overall. He'll kick off by sharing his personal experiences when making 2 television series, which you may have seen, My Family in Galapagos, and some of his family are also here in the audience. We then have a fantastic array of speakers, including our giant tortoise expert, Ainhoa Nieto, who, with GCT's Anne Guizou, who's also here, is working to protect the iconic Galapagos giant tortoise. We have GCT's head of programs, Dr. Jen Jones, and she'll be telling us about our work to protect and keep the waters around Galapagos healthy by fighting threats of plastic pollution and overfishing. We'll also have some video messages from our critical partners in the Galapagos, organizations such as the Island Conservation, Charles Darwin Foundation, and the Universidad San Francisco, Quito. So just a few words from me on GCT's work and the theme of tonight. So GCT, as many of you know, is dedicated to conservation of the Galapagos Islands, and we've been doing that for over 25 years. It's about protecting the unique biodiversity of those islands, restoring habitats, and saving endangered species from extinction. We do this by raising funds and delivering groundbreaking, impactful conservation projects. These projects include supporting partners to investigate the impacts of human activity on species such as the iconic Galapagos giant tortoise. We're undertaking research to ensure effective management of marine protected areas. You'll hear a lot about that tonight. We're working to restore habitats on islands such as Floreana, to reintroduce locally extinct species and get rid of those feral species such as wild cats and rats. As I say, the theme of tonight is protecting biodiversity and preventing species loss. Just last week, some of you may have read the Living Planet report, which gave us alarming figures. The Earth's wildlife populations have plunged by an average of 69% in just under 50 years. Just 4 years ago, that figure was 60%. There are many scientists out there who believe we are living through the 6th mass extinction, the largest loss of life on Earth since the time of dinosaurs. People need biodiversity to survive. We need it, from the food we eat to the air we breathe. Preventing biodiversity loss is one of the best solutions for fighting climate change. And very importantly, the Galapagos still retains, unbelievably, 95% of its original species, and we need to keep it that way. If we can't conserve the Galapagos, which really is a wildlife jewel, what hope is there for other places on this planet? So tonight, as we celebrate the one-year anniversary of the creation of the marine protected area around Galapagos and urge leaders at the UN Biodiversity Conference, COP15 in December, to take action, we'll share with you how we are addressing some of the most urgent threats to the Galapagos' unique biodiversity. The actions we take together in the next few years will be absolutely critical. One last point on biodiversity, it's also about relationships between plankton and whale sharks, but also between people and wildlife. And we're committed to raising up local voices from the islands themselves, and you'll hear about how we're helping wildlife thrive alongside local people, who are the essential stewards of the fragile Galapagos environment. I do hope you'll be inspired by what you hear this evening. And let me finish with the words of Sir David Attenborough, who this summer received an award from the very Ecuador ambassador who is here. And he said, "We must all come together without delay to deal with the threats that are impacting our natural world, and Galapagos is a beacon for the world that we must not lose." So your support for the important work being done by GCT is more vital than ever. May I now invite Lord Goldsmith, the Minister for Asia, Energy, Climate and Environment, to say a few words, and he will be followed by the Ecuadorian Ambassador to the UK, Mr. Sebastian Corral.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Charmian and Jen. I'm not sure where Jen is sitting. And Sebastian, it's good to see you. It is a real honor to be here, to join you in celebrating Galapagos Day. I think most British people would agree that as children, it is one of our collective dreams to go and visit the Galapagos Islands. It's something we're all taught about, that 1835 date etched into all of our brains. The Galapagos Islands, a sort of case study in the magic of nature. You know, we all know about Darwin's finches. We all know about these extraordinary tortoises. I actually adopted a tortoise. She's called Jane. I was going to try and find you a picture, but I realized there's no point holding it up. You won't see it. You just have to imagine her. Beautiful Jane, who I get the occasional update about from friends in the Galapagos. But I, having, during COVID, been given a virtual tour. I was given one of those headsets, and I was able to do a bit of diving virtually, able to go up the hills and meet some of the tortoises, and it was a magical thing, and I thought probably that's where it would end. But nothing prepares you for actually being in the Galapagos Islands. It is, I think, genuinely a spiritual experience. You see things you can't imagine until you've seen them with your own eyes. Just an incredible abundance, amazing diversity, and protected by just a wonderful people, the Galapaguenas, is that correct? Galapaguenas, and Ecuadorians generally. The Galapagos Islands are a source of incredible national pride, and that is reflected in how well those islands are looked after. So I will forever treasure the memories I have of being in the Galapagos just a year or so ago, and I would love to go back and check in on Jane, check she's not misbehaving, young teenager tortoise. But despite that beauty, and walking along some of the beaches in the Galapagos, it's just nothing but nature. No litter, no rubbish, nothing. The odd, slightly menacing marine iguana, they exist only there. They don't live anywhere else. But appearances can be deceptive. And I went with members of the trust, volunteers, and I was given a little round sieve, and we put the sand through the sieve. And in just a square foot of beach, I was able to fill a jam jar by about 2 centimeters of tiny granules of plastic. And it's incredibly depressing to think even there, this remote, perfectly protected natural haven, even there, the ravages that we're inflicting on the world's ocean have left their mark. The Galapagos are incredibly lucky to have this trust. The trust goes way beyond the call of duty. It calls on volunteers of all ages, all backgrounds, and really they pour love into the work that they do. But the Galapagos, in a sense, are a microcosm now of what is happening globally to the ocean, where we heard about the sixth mass extinction. Well, that obviously impacts the ocean as well. The extinction is affecting marine life just as much as it's affecting the land. And if you consider how important the ocean is to our very survival, that is just madness what we're doing. The overfishing, the plastic pollution, the contamination, the coastal degradation, the grubbing out of extraordinary habitats, the corals, the mangroves, the seagrass, the damage we are doing is, I think, the very definition of insanity. We cannot survive without the ocean. 1 in every 2 breaths we take is nourished. The oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean. If you're a coastal community in an area which is experiencing ever-increasing and ever more intense storms, as many parts of the world are, it is the coastal ecosystem that protects you. I came back from Colombia shortly before going to Ecuador, and they are embarking on a huge mangrove restoration program. They're not doing it for biodiversity reasons. They're not even doing it to absorb carbon, although it'll do both of those things. They're doing it because when they were hit by record storms, the likes of which they had never experienced before in Colombia, they realized that those communities where the mangroves had been protected or where the coral reefs were still intact were largely buffeted, largely protected from the storms. So they've embarked on this program now as a means of defending communities. And of course, food. You know, we all eat fish, but there are hundreds of millions of people for whom fishing is their main source of livelihood. There are probably about 1 billion people for whom fish is the main source of protein. And you can see what happens when you denude the ocean of life. In fact, you remember that it was Captain Phillip, was that the name of the film, the Tom Hanks film, the pirate film? There's one moment in there where the Somali pirates are talking to their captive, and they are explaining that there was I forget the language they used, but there was a marked and measurable and undeniable spike in piracy, which coincided exactly with the moment those waters were declared a dead zone as a consequence of pillage, mostly through illegal fishing. And we are seeing the same beginning in other parts of the world. The fishermen of Senegal are making exactly the same point today. There's foreign vessels come in and exhaust their ocean, 50,000 families, all depending on fishing. They're going to have to do something to survive. They've got the boats, they understand the waters, but they've got no fish left to catch. So we are beginning, I think, to recognize the importance of the ocean. I think COP26 was a turning point, actually. It was the first climate COP where ocean really became a central, a focal point, the recognition of the ocean as a solution to climate change, but also as part of the adaptation that communities are going to need to invest in order to protect themselves against the impact of inevitable climate change. And I think it did mark a turning point. But what I think was most exciting about moving oceans into the heart of our climate discussion was that it gave us an opportunity to see some really staggering examples of ambition and leadership. And right at the forefront of that, I think, was Ecuador. We had a moment where I think the whole of COP was captivated by an announcement made by the president of Ecuador, the president of Panama, Costa Rica, Colombia, out of nowhere, seemingly, a commitment to protect an area 500,000 square kilometers, joining those 4 countries. It's exactly the kind of ambition that I think the world needs to see more of. And it was, for a day, it was all really people were talking about at COP. And it inspired, and I could see, as one of the people who was trying to raise ambition among other countries, I could see other countries stepping up, wanting to match that level of ambition and coming up with their own pledges. So I will forever be indebted to those 4 countries. But President Lasso from Ecuador really stepped up for COP, and he enabled us, I think, to deliver a more successful COP than we would otherwise have been able to do. And a source of pride for me, as someone who, I'm existing in a government which is just about hanging in there, and who knows what will happen next week. But whatever happens, because of some people I'm looking at here, Ilona and Bryony, who created the Blue Planet Fund, which is a wonderful new project, a funding program that the UK runs, £500 million. We were able to use that fund, and I think the very first investment we made, it was not a huge investment, but it was enough to kickstart that CMAR program, that 500,000 square kilometers. We were the first investors, and on the back of our little investment, gave confidence to donors all around the world, and the project was flooded with the resources that it needed, and today this is one of the most exciting ocean protection programs that I'm aware of. So thank you to Brian and thank you to Ilona, because what you're doing in the name of the UK government is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So, I shouldn't be really heaping the praise on the UK here. I'm really here to praise Ecuador for the wonderful things they've done. But I do want to acknowledge that there are some phenomenal things being done despite the chaos. Now, the Galapagos Conservation Trust is a wonderful organization. They looked after me when I was on the islands. They gave me an experience that I will never forget. They do wonderful work. I'm assuming everyone here is already a supporter of the Trust, but if you're not a supporter of the Trust, please sign up, become a member, support them, because they're protecting one of the world's great jewels. There's almost nothing like the Galapagos Islands around the world. Nature is a magical thing, as we know, but there's nowhere that I'm aware of where you cannot leave the Galapagos Islands without having a sense of reverence for nature, that if you didn't have when you arrived, you are 100% guaranteed to have when you leave. And part of that is down to the amazing work that this trust does. So thank you so much to you for all your work. Thank you to you for supporting the trust. Long may this trust continue. And thank you to Ecuador. I don't know where Sebastian is, the ambassador. Ambassador, my job is to introduce you. You don't need much of an introduction, but as a representative of this great country, I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, first of all, there's a phone here. I don't know if it's yours. Well, after what Zach just said, it's going to be difficult to the level is so high. Anyway, first of all, thank you for your words towards Ecuador, towards our president. Zach, it was very nice of you to say so. Chairman, thank you very much for inviting me. Sharon, I know you probably are online. And to all of the scientific and experts that are here today and that are watching us, again, thanks for the fantastic work you are doing. Ladies and gentlemen, I would really like to thank the Galapagos Conservation Trust for organizing another edition of Galapagos Day, and a special occasion to highlight the importance of the protection and conservation of the Galapagos Islands and its environment. This is certainly a perfect opportunity to celebrate the historic announcement made by President Guillermo Lasso 1 year ago at COP26 in Glasgow for the creation of the new marine reserve called Hermandad in the Galapagos Islands. This announcement became a reality in January of 2022 when President Lasso officially signed the declaration to expand the boundaries of the Galapagos Marine Reserve by 60,000 square kilometers. We are now working in the management plan for this new area in an inclusive and transparent process that involves all relevant institutions and stakeholders. It is very important to remember that the new marine reserve is a key contribution from the Ecuadorian government to the safeguard of critical marine habitats, species, and genetic diversity, as well as for natural migratory routes. Nonetheless, this iconic natural laboratory is facing global threats resulting from activities undertaken beyond the reserve and its surrounding economic exclusive zone, such as overfishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. We stress the importance of preventing illegal fishing in the surrounding waters of the Galapagos Islands and the urgency of ensuring full compliance with obligations under international and national law, as well as the need to strengthen cooperation of the international community for the development and implementation of joint controls and monitoring strategies. Additionally, the Galapagos Islands are more and more affected by plastic pollution. As Zach was saying, you could actually find plastic on the beaches, to the point that more than 80% of the plastic litter that is collected in the beaches and shores of the archipelago comes from outside the islands, and even from other continents. Ecuador has been advocating for concrete collective measures to address this environmental threat. In this regard, we have had a clear leadership demonstrated by founding of the Group of Friends Against Plastic Pollution at the General Assembly of the UN, the convening of the first ministerial meeting on marine litter and plastic pollution, the informal dialogue on plastic pollution and trade at the World Trade Organization, and the strong support to the adoption of UN Environmental Assembly resolution with the mandate to start the negotiation of a legally binding treaty to tackle plastic pollution in November of this year. As a recognition of this commitment, our Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Luis Vallas, that's probably listening to us, was designated by the group of Latin American and Caribbean countries as one of the 2 regional representatives of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee Bureau that will develop that treaty. Since then, we have been receiving many signals of support to our aspiration for Luis Vallas to chair the INC Bureau and its negotiation process, which I suppose you are totally aware and you'll be supporting us. I would like to refer to the forthcoming UN Biodiversity Conference, COP15, on the 77th session of the United States Nations Assembly. President Guillermo Lasso participated in the high-level side event, Countdown to CBD COP15, landmark leaders event for a nature-positive world. President Lasso stressed that Ecuador, as the country with the greatest biological diversity per square kilometer in the world, has a great variety of terrestrial and aquatic species, and unique and fragile ecosystems that must be protected and preserved, emphasizing that it is urgent that we provide a new boost in favor of biodiversity. During the event, President Lasso also presented on behalf of Ecuador, Gabon, Maldives, and the United Kingdom, the joint declaration, Political Vision, a 10-point plan for financing biodiversity, which is a financing packages in support of the consensus that will be required at COP15 CBD. This document reflects shared political vision among the 4 proponent countries, sets out a way forward to reduce the global financing gap for biodiversity, and defines what is expected from developed countries, financial institutions, private sector, philanthropists, and civil society to meet the challenge of increasing and mobilizing resources for the protection of the biodiversity. It is necessary to emphasize that scaling up and mobilizing new, additional, predictable, and timely resources from all sources is in a streamlined and simplified manner in favor of developing countries is indispensable to meet commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity and the post-2020 global framework to be adopted in December 2022 in Montreal. Ecuador will continue fulfilling its obligation and commitments, undertaking actions at all levels, but we also raise our voice to demand the co-responsibility of developed countries and international financial institutions with a clear conviction that the protection of nature and biodiversity and the fight against plastic pollution is vital to the preservation of human life and our economies and societies. Finally, it is worth mentioning the excellent environmental cooperation with the United Kingdom. Lord Goldsmith's visit to Ecuador and Galapagos in early 2022 further strengthened bilateral links and the assistance provided by the United Kingdom for environmental research, protection, and conservation projects. On our side, in the framework of the United Nations General Assembly, Ecuador adhered to the proposal of the United Kingdom Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership to increase action to protect, conserve, and restore the world's forest while delivering sustainable development and promoting an inclusive rural transformation. We welcome the excellent level of cooperation we have with the United Kingdom in environmental matters and certainly trust that the British government will not disregard some other issues that are of great interest to Ecuador. Finally, I must say that I'm so honored to be here. I'm so honored to be part of this event. And as Zach was saying before, I think it's absolutely necessary that everybody that has a possibility in any way to work and to collaborate with the trust has almost a moral obligation to do it. The work that's being done by this entity, it's only something to congratulate, and of course, being part of it can make a big difference. Thank you very much.
Those were wonderful words. Thank you both very much indeed. And to hear senior leaders in the world talk in that way must give us all great hope. We're now going to move forward, and I'm going to introduce our host for the rest of this evening's lectures. This is Monty Halls. He's a fantastic president to GCT. And in addition to that, he's a TV presenter, he's a marine biologist, he's an expedition leader, and he's a professional diver. You may well know him, as I mentioned earlier, because he has presented a number of successful series, including Channel 4's My Family and the Galapagos, when he went with his daughters and his wife, and also the BBC's Great Barrier Reef. So please welcome Monty to the stage.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for coming out tonight. And a particular word has to be said. The ambassador always supports everything we do for the Galapagos. He's so hands-on, he's so proactive about the islands. That's wonderful to see. And also Lord Goldsmith coming out tonight of all nights. You know, fair play, fair play. And thank you to you as well. I've got a neat segue coming up because we've all been a bit fascinated by what's going on sort of politically, and thank you for being here and not being at home and sort of hitting the refresh button aghast on BBC News every 2 seconds. And I was thinking as I was on the train on the way down, it's like a bad episode of Game of Thrones in fast forward, but with no dragons. But you've come to the right place for dragons, of course. That's my little segue. So I've been asked to just talk a little bit. Tom's just leant over to me and said, you've got 5 minutes, we're behind schedule. So I'm going to really sort of smash it out. But a little bit about my background in the islands and why the islands are so special. We all know why the islands are special, but just a little bit from a personal perspective, really. The first time I went there was the year 2000 to make a film about penguins, and I knew very little about the Galapagos. I was like, how absurd, going to a group of equatorial islands, 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador, never been joined to the continent by a land bridge. And they've got penguins there, but they've got lizards there as well, and giant tortoises and all that sort of stuff. What's going on there? And of course, I was completely enchanted and bewitched by the Galapagos, as anyone who visits the Galapagos is, of course. And the reason is they're beset on all sides by mighty ocean currents, each of which has got a slightly different character. There's different ecosystems as you go up in altitude within the islands. Each island has a totally unique character. And when they were first discovered, they were described as the Enchanted Isles, Islas Enchantas. And the reason that's thought to be the case for that is that the different water currents, different temperatures, meant sea mists would rise up, and these volcanic islands would seem to appear and then vanish into the ocean, and suddenly the tiller wouldn't work because there'd be a weird current going on. And then you went ashore, and of course, here there be dragons. And here there be dragons. Why do you think it is that reptiles dominate the larger niches in the ecosystem there? The herbivores, they tend to be reptiles. Why is that? Can anyone think? So a set of islands appears about 3 or 4 million years ago, longer actually, but 3 or 4 million years ago out of the ocean. That's another story. And why do you think reptiles occupied that island and mammals didn't? Here's the reason. Can't take any answers, haven't got time. Here's the reason. That a mammal couldn't possibly survive floating for 6 weeks or so on a current to get to that island on a log or on a pine, raft of pine leaves or whatever, of palm leaves, but reptiles could. they could close their system down. So that's the reason reptiles tend to dominate the ecosystem on the islands. So the islands enchant us. Now, of course, they haven't always been, they've been enchanting for everyone who's been there, except for Thomas de Bolaña, who discovered them in 1535 and wrote to the King of Spain and said, awful, God-forsaken, awful place. But another person went onto the island of Floreana in 24th of September, 1835, a young scientist called Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin was 26 years old by this point. By this stage, he'd been at sea for about 5 years on the Beagle, as we all know, sailing around the world. And interesting thing about Charles Darwin, that as he went past as they set out, essentially, as they went past the breakwater in Plymouth, he hadn't been on a boat before, and he started being sick as he went past the breakwater in Plymouth. And he was sick for 5 years. Never got over his seasickness. Fitzroy said he never really got over his seasickness. Makes him an emperor amongst men, quite frankly, because he hung on in there. By the time he got to the islands, he could shoot like a sniper. He could ride like a gaucho. He was a survival expert. We have an image of Charles Darwin. It's his big beard, domed forehead, looking cheesed off in Shrewsbury. And actually, he was an amazing, amazing, amazing man, one of the great explorers of the age. And as he walked up the hill in Floreana, he was met. Now, Floreana was the first place that was colonized. 1831, it was colonized. And as he walked up the hill with Nicholas Lawson, the governor of the islands, the governor said to him, and he walked past all the empty tortoise shells, because already the tortoises were being consumed. And Nicholas Lawson said to him, you know what, Charles, young Charles, I can tell which island a tortoise comes from just by the shape of its shell. And that remark lodged in his mind. And when he did The Origin of Species, wrote The Origin of Species in 1859, he credited Lawson for that. He said, that's the moment I sort of realized there was something going on, something amazing in these islands, something that would change the way we think about ourselves, change the way we think about the natural world, change the way we think about everything. And that was evolution, of course. So the islands are phenomenally important. One of the reasons they've remained so significant is the protection they've been given, and the fact that 95% of the species are still there. So the last thing I'm going to say, Tom's glaring at me, the last thing I'm going to say is I attended the World Island Summit. My apologies for repeating myself. I told a similar story just up in the reception we had a moment ago. I attended the World Island Sustainability Summit on San Cristobal earlier this year. And I looked out on a group of people that were all fanatical about island groups. And I realized I was looking at a group of driven, focused people who firmly believed that they could turn everything round, who firmly believed they could save island ecosystems and indeed ecosystems around the world. And one of the things they kept saying was how significant the Galapagos Conservation Trust was to all of them and the work that they were doing. And there's a great quote from Amelia Earhart that says, never stop someone doing something that you told them was impossible. Because obviously they're on a mission. And there's another great quote from Margaret Mead that says, never doubt the ability of a small group of people, motivated people, to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And it's a wonderful thing to see a group of enthusiasts for the islands here this evening. We've got Angela Darwin here, 83, I hope Angela doesn't mind me saying 83, right the way through to a 7-week-old baby, the next generation of explorers and conservationists. And the last thing I'm going to say is, obviously, I visited the islands with my little girls as well, the Ginger Ninjas, who are here somewhere, there, right there. And one of the things I really loved seeing, and it makes the next introduction really wonderful for me, was the rise of brilliant young female scientists. Purely subjective observation, and it was so inspiring for my little girls to see these female scientists coming through. And there's a great poem that says, never be a princess if you can be the queen. Swing the scepter, wear the crown, dominate the scene. Don't wear crystal slippers, they'll shatter on your feet. Be happy in your own skin, then you'll be complete. Be a barefoot Amazon, be young, be wild, be free, but never grow a wishbone daughter where your backbone ought to be. And it was wonderful to see these young female scientists just getting out there and changing the world. So the great thing we saw was belief, profound belief at that summit. But given the funding, given the backing, that these individuals can achieve the most wonderful things. And I think that's what GCT is all about. Last thing I'll say before I introduce it, if you want to have a chat with Isla and Molly, who's back there, I think, about their experiences as young people in those islands, do feel free to have a natter with them later on. Right, so I'll quickly introduce the next video, and it's by Paula, sorry, stick my £2 W.H. Smith glasses on. Paula Castano from Island Conservation, talking about her work restoring islands and reintroducing species. What are the threats facing the Galapagos? Invasive species, habitat loss. So trying to turn the clock back. It's a very delicate and intricate, but incredibly powerful process of reintroducing the ecosystem that was there. So that's Paula's work, and the video is 12 minutes long, and it's bringing birds back from the brink of extinction.
Hi everyone, my name is Paula Castaño. I'm a native species manager with Island Conservation, and I'm currently based in Chile. However, I have been involved in efforts and working in the Galapagos for the last 8 years. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the restoration efforts that we are being implemented in the Galapagos with support of Galapagos Conservation Trust and in partnership with the Galapagos National Park and others like Durwell Wildlife Conservation Trust. When we are going to be talking tonight about restoration efforts, I'm actually going to be focusing on how we are bringing birds back from the brink of extinction. But before we get into how we are restoring these islands and how we are potentially bringing birds back from the brink of extinction, I wanted to focus and bring your attention to why islands and why we choose to work on islands. So islands represent only the 5% of the Earth land mass. However, 19% of avian biodiversity can be found on islands. 41% of all endangered terrestrial vertebrates are found on islands. And since the 1500s, 75% of all extinctions have occurred on islands, in 86% of the cases because of invasive species. So you can see what is the greatest impact that we can have for biodiversity conservation when we are focusing and working on islands in these very unique locations like the Galapagos. And so you will be starting thinking, okay, so what we can do to prevent these extinctions and for preventing that these ecosystems and functions are lost forever. Well, there are efforts of restoration and rewilding that can be implemented on these islands. When we are restoring islands, we are looking to remove these invasive species that are the threats, and then letting the ecosystem to restore by itself, or why not helping them by bringing species that are no longer present on those ecosystems to restore the ecosystem function, but also to bring back these species and not lose them forever. And so in the Galapagos, we have a great example of this effort. It's actually Pinzon Island restoration. Pinzon Island is an island where in 2012, invasive rodents were removed successfully. And after that, over the last decade, we have seen remarkable changes on the island of restoration. So we have put the species like the vermilion flycatcher, which was present at that time, but actually the population is even healthier now. We have the healthiest population of these species in the entire archipelago, just living on Pinzon Island. In addition to that, we also have a very healthy population of Galapagos hawks, which is a very unique population from Pinzon Island. They are doing very well. They are thriving and reproducing, and also having their role as a top predator, controlling the other species and maintaining the balance of this ecosystem. But I want you to focus also in two of the species that we have in the center, which are the cactus finch and the Galapagos rail. The story of these birds are very unique and very interesting, and it shows you like the efforts and what it takes and why, when you remove these invasive species from these locations, how the island can restore in itself and can bring you back species that were never thought to be present or could potentially be present on that island. For example, for the cactus finch, the last records of this species was in the early 1900s. Afterwards, we didn't saw any of those. And then in 2019, we started seeing individuals coming back to the island and establishing on the island. The same case is, for example, for the Galapagos rail. This one is very interesting because everyone before we saw Galapagos rail on Pinzon, they said there was no possible, that there were no possibility that this species could be ever present on that island because it didn't have any habitat for it. Because when you are looking for this species where it's located in other islands, for example, in Santa Cruz, Santiago, San Cristobal, it's always found in very high humid areas. And so there was no way possible they will have habitat in Pinzon for this species. Well, the species proved us wrong. There is actually habitat for them because now we have a very healthy population and they are right by themselves. We didn't have to help them. This is a species that usually is known for not flying that much, but actually it got by itself to Pinzon and now the population is doing pretty well. So these examples are something, great examples of what we can see when we are restoring islands. Even though we are focusing here on birds, there is other species and ecosystem functions that are recovering as well. But we didn't want, for example, in this case, to leave the island just restoring by itself. We actually wanted to support the island and bring back a species that was no longer present. So this is the case of the woodpecker finches. Woodpecker finches were a species that used to be present on Pinzon Island. We have records of the California Academy of Science during those expeditions that they did in the early 1900s and late 1800s, where individuals were collected on Pinzon and it looked like there was an established and breeding population. By the 1980s, the population was kind of rare and there was not really a lot of breeding happening. And the last record that we have of the species, one sighting was in 2012 of only one individual. After that, we haven't seen the species. So we thought with Galapagos National Park and other partners and with support of Galapagos Conservation Trust and Rewild, why not bring this species back to that island? Why not help continue the restoration of Pinzon Island, but at the same time, take this as an opportunity to build protocols and understandings of how we can do reintroduction of songbirds in the Galapagos for future projects like the Floreana Island, but also other species like the mangrove finch, which is a critically endangered species. And so we decided that in June and July this year, we went ahead with the translocation of 23 individuals to the island of Pinzon. Before we were able to translocate these individuals, they were captured on Santa Cruz Island. That was our source population. They were brought in captivity for a couple of days. During this time, they were treated for internal parasites, but also they have enough time for their guts to be clear because we wanted to make sure that we were not bringing any insects that they would be potentially eating and that could not be present on Pinzon to Pinzon Island because they were from Santa Cruz. So we don't want at the same time to be translocating other things that potentially can be harming the island that we want to be continuing to restore. And so we successfully were able to house these individuals in captivity. This is very remarkable because it's the first time it has been done successfully. And for this, we implemented protocols that we developed in a previous project when we were looking to determine how we can have in captive holding 5 species of Darwin finches on Floreana Island. The protocols that we developed at that time proved to be very successful with this because we didn't have any mortality during the period of time that these birds were in captivity. Once they had in captivity, they were translocated to Pinzon Island and we feed them with transmitters on their backs that used to be, that they were for tracking them while they were on the island and identifying if they were staying or they were moving. And so you should know, and like you will be thinking, okay, well, they are birds, so they can fly. So there is always a greatest potential that the birds are gonna be moving to other islands as well. And maybe not staying where you want to be or want them to be staying. There's also a potential that they are kind of like missing their homes and they wanna go back and things like it. And so we were monitoring Santa Cruz Island to be able to determine if the population or some of these individuals were going back to that island as well. Because when we were doing the monitoring on Pinzon, we monitored them and we start seeing that by day 5, we were not finding the birds. And so we're like, okay, maybe they are going back to Santa Cruz Island. Well, they are not on Santa Cruz Island either. So, okay, so maybe they are going somewhere else. And so in here you can see in this picture, the closest to us is actually Pinzon Island with the habitat where they were released. In the far end, you have Rabida right in front of us. And back and behind that, you have a bigger island, which is Santiago Island. And so we thought, well, they can see the island, potentially they can just be flying there. And so we decided to expand on monitoring. And yes, indeed, we found 2 individuals were released on Pinzon Island, on Rabbit Island. And we saw that they were doing well. So with this in mind, what I want you to understand is that we cannot even say, like, for example, if we stop seeing it, then 5 days after we released it, or if we saw it on Rabbit Island, we cannot say that the effort was successful or unsuccessful. This is in early stages still, and what we are seeing is greater information for the planning of subsequent reintroductions of these species on that island, but also for the future of other reintroductions in the Galapagos of some birds. And so the next stages that we have is actually in November, we have a trip to Pinzon and Rabbit Island. We are going to be monitoring for these species and other ones in the environment. But also in earlier next year, when it's the breeding season, we are going to be monitoring the species as well. We want to identify the potentially being established in any nesting areas. Are they returning to Pinzon? Are they maybe on Santa Cruz? And how we can be implementing subsequent translocations so we can make this effort successful for the long term. So with these results, what we are looking to do and what I've been telling you, we are not going to be only restoring Pinzon Island. We are looking to pave the way for future restoration efforts and reintroduction efforts in the archipelago. One of those examples is actually Floreana Island. This is one of the islands that the Galapagos National Park, with other partners, including Island Conservation, and for which Galapagos Conservation Trust is a great partner as well. We are looking to remove invasive predators from this island. It's an inhabited island, will be the largest inhabited island from that, where that is going to be done in 2023. But what is going to be given once we are able to remove these invasive predators is an opportunity to reintroduce at least 12 species that are no longer present, that are locally seen on the island, and 10 of those are actually birds. And 4 of those birds are actually Darwin finches. And so we will have raptors in between some of the individuals that we are going to be releasing. We have Galapagos rails and other species. And so what we are learning from this opportunity from Pinzon is actually how we can develop these protocols, how we can continue to have these implement and see what is happening, what is working, what is not working, and how we can actually improve the odds of these reintroductions to be successful into the future. And so I want to thank all of you for your support. Without you, we would not be here and doing the amazing job that we are able to do in this amazing location in islands. And I want to thank Galapagos Conservation Trust for the opportunity to talk with you tonight, but also to another founder, Rewild, who supported this effort, and our long-term partner, the Galapagos National Park. So thank you all for your support, and I hope you enjoyed tonight the rest of the talks. And if you have any questions in the future, please let us know. We will be happy to answer any questions.
I think Paula is symptomatic of that belief and that energy of the scientists who are involved in the work out there, and the conservationists and the researchers. They're absolutely unstoppable. And the only thing that does stop them is lack of funding, actually. And, you know, once they've got it, they absolutely fly. They're off. By the way, quick thing before I introduce the next thing. If you want to appear an expert on the Galapagos when you're out there, if someone points to an animal, just put the word lava or Galapagos in front of that animal. And you've got an 80% chance you're going to name the species. Galapagos hawk, lava lizard, lava gull. So, yeah, just top tip. So, okay, the next talk is Anua Neti-Claude, is that right? Who's been working with the Charles Darwin Foundation on the Galapagos Tortoise Movement Ecology Program, and Anne Gizu, Education and Outreach Coordinator for GCT on the islands. And they'll be talking about the Tortoise Program and indeed the Outreach Program, 2 phenomenally significant programs.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. It's definitely an honor to be here, to be just with Galapagos Conservation Trust and sharing one of the most amazing projects. And, well, I might be biased, but giant tortoises, which is one of the most iconic species in the world, but it's definitely, for me, the most special animal in the Galapagos. So I hope that by the end of this talk, you will also be in love with these animals the same way that we are. And so I'm going to share with you some of the work that we have been doing in the Galapagos. And I'm going to start with some bad news, because unfortunately, we're about to hit 8 billion people in this planet by November 15. So maybe you knew this already. But definitely, if you think about feeding so many of us in this planet, it's just posing so many challenges to conserve the environment and conserve the habitats, but also for the wildlife species that are trying to thrive with us in the same planet. So this is definitely one of the main threats, right, for conserving biodiversity. So the world is changing, and we know that it's changing very quickly, and maybe some of you remember how it was London a few decades ago. This is Galapagos, less than 100 years ago, just few inhabitants living there, just very few people. There was no electricity, there was no cars. There was maybe a boat every 6 months, or maybe even more, because they couldn't get it. So it's changing very quickly, and it's also true for the Galapagos Islands. So this is also Santa Cruz. It's the same place that you just saw the other picture. And Santa Cruz has been growing very quickly, and the Galapagos Islands have been growing very quickly. So we have a population of more than 30,000 people now in the archipelago, and we have a tourist industry that is increasing, that is exponentially growing on the archipelago. So this is definitely posing new threats and new challenges for the species, for the unique species that we only find in the Galapagos to actually survive in this archipelago. So this is just some of the threats that tortoises, but also other species are facing in Galapagos. So we have more roads, we have more fences. This is creating barriers for tortoises to move and to walk around. We have blackberry, for example, as an invasive species that is also creating barriers, but we have a number of other invasive species, as Paula was just mentioning. And unfortunately, I need to talk about illegal trade, because this is targeting also giant tortoises and other reptile species in Galapagos, and this is one of the threats now for the conservation of wildlife in Galapagos. So back in 2009, we started a research project thanks to the Galapagos Conservation Trust and other institutions, the Charles Darwin Foundation, in partner with the Galapagos Conservation Trust, the St. Louis Zoo, and we were trying to understand how tortoises are moving on the archipelago, where they go, why they do it, when they move. And so we were using these devices that you can see on the screen. This is a high-tech device, it's a GPS, that is going to provide a lot of information about the movement of the tortoises. So we attach the GPS to the carapace. You can see on the picture, we attach to the big ones, and then we can follow them, we can track them during time. So the program has probably a very long and not very sexy name, right? The Galapagos Tortoise Movement Ecology Program. But we've been working there for 13 years just to try to understand how tortoises are moving in the archipelago, but also how can we conserve migration? How can we ensure that they can continue migrating on the archipelago in a changing environment? And so we are not only tagging the adults, but we are also tagging the babies. And this is, well, for me, is probably the most special thing. I was asked today, what is the most special thing that I've been doing? And maybe just working with these babies. When they hatch and when they just come out from the nest, we are tagging them as well. So we are placing tiny devices, like a tiny button that you can see here. We attach to the carapace, and this allows us to also follow the babies when they are growing, so we can know how they survive and how can they thrive in the environment and if they survive, because definitely this is a very challenging environment for them when they are very young. Hopefully, we can play this video. I might need help. Sorry. It should start. So this video is going to show you a classic distant migration of tortoises from the highlands to the lowlands of Santa Cruz. So I I was trying to make it shorter, but well, we are going to see the whole thing. But we are just getting into Galapagos, and you're going to see how tortoises are moving between lowlands and highlands in Santa Cruz. And so in this island, for those of you that haven't been lucky enough to be there, the highlands are humid the whole year round. And you can see the transformation of the land. So we have a lot of farming, a lot of agriculture in the highlands. And so tortoises, both males and females, have to migrate every year from the highlands to the lowlands and then go back all the way up to the highlands. So the highlands remain humid the whole year. So tortoises are going up so they can feed during the dry season where the highlands are humid and are green. And then they can come back to the lowlands during the rainy season when there's also food in the lowlands so they can feed them, and females will remain and will nest and will lay their eggs in the lowlands. And this is another example of how tortoises are migrating in the archipelago, but this is Alcero volcano. It's actually my favorite place in Galapagos. It's an isolated volcano. There's no people living here. And it's just amazing to see how these giant tortoises, that they can weigh more than 300 kilograms, they're just pulling themselves up and down the volcano every year. They go around the crater, they go inside the crater, and they go all the way down. And of course, in this volcano, with no human activities, with no human impacts, tortoises are doing much better and are not facing the same threats that we are seeing in other islands. And so some of the threats and some of the changes that we humans are causing in the environment are also threatening the health of the animals and the health of the tortoises more specifically. So we are seeing pollution as one of the threats. We are seeing also tortoises hit by cars now in Galapagos. And so we need to think also about the health of the tortoises. And definitely me being a veterinarian, I always think about health, always. So I'm always, when I see a picture, I'm seeing that there's something going on there with the health, right? But when we think about health, we should talk just about one health. So if we think about the health of the wildlife, the health of the animals, the health of the humans, and the health of the environment, it's just all together, it's just all interconnected. And just COVID was just the perfect example, right? So the pandemic, it just highlights the importance and the interconnection between human and animal health and why we should just talk about just one health. So using this approach, this One Health approach, we are conducting a number of research projects to understand the health of the tortoises and also using tortoises as sentinels of the ecosystems. So these tortoises are going to be animals that can indicate how is the health of the entire ecosystem. And so we are helping and we are working with some local students. So they are pursuing their theses, their master's degrees. And we've been able to identify novel viruses, so viruses that haven't been described ever in Galapagos. So we found 4 novel viruses in giant tortoises. We found a novel fungus on the carapace of the tortoises as well. And we even described antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So we have found resistant bacteria within the feces of wild giant tortoises. And this is another project that we have been conducting recently. This is Karina, is one of our students. She's from Santa Cruz, from the Galapagos. And during all this time that we've been working there, we've been observing tortoises eating plastics. And pollution is increasing in Galapagos, inland as well, not only in the ocean. And unfortunately, we've been seeing animals just eating plastics by mistake. So we were wondering, well, to what extent this plastic pollution and garbage in general is just affecting the health of the giant tortoises in the Galapagos. So Karina was working in the field. She did a great work, like every single week, going to the field, collecting tortoise feces, so a lot of poop, almost like 200 kilograms of poop. And you cannot imagine the work of just carrying that and just processing in the field to see how much garbage was in the feces. And this is just an example, yeah, and that was actually the reaction, right? It's unbelievable, the number of items, especially plastics, but all of the type of garbage, including face masks, that we have found in tortoise feces. So definitely it's a current threat that is not only affecting tortoises, but definitely affecting other species, and that we need to take action now. And well, it's not only bad news, I promise. And science can be very cool as well, and we are doing very exciting projects. And I'm about to present a video of one of the projects that we are starting to do now. And Well, you're going to see, but we are using an X-ray machine, a portable X-ray machine, and probably you're wondering why these crazy scientists want to do X-rays and tortoises. Well, we are going to explain in the video. It has been very challenging. We had to try the equipment few times to actually be able to take X-rays on these huge animals, but you're going to see in the video and why we're doing this, and well, hopefully this video can be...
So our team is X-raying giant tortoises here in Santa Cruz, and it's the first time in the world that we have been able to X-ray to look for the eggs within the female giant tortoises. Right now, we're X-raying Florence, and we're checking how many eggs she has in this clutch. We do this all season long to understand if a female that migrates on the island versus doesn't migrate, if one is more reproductively successful or has greater reproductive fitness.
Well, then I'm just following Ainhoa, and just to keep going on a brighter tone as well, I would like to give you a glimpse of how we translate our work and findings for education purposes. So from the very beginning, our program has included an education and outreach component, as we believe it's key for success in conservation. Our aim is to connect younger generation in Galapagos with their natural environment, of course, including giant tortoises. And for this, we use an experiential approach based on science, and we work in partnership to create local synergies. Our team has created a whole set of activities that can be run as standalone or built into larger projects. And so here we will see, I think it went back. On the pictures here, for example, it's a class of 4 years old because we have actually activities for any ages, from like the little ones to teenagers or older as well. And they're on a safari, tortoise safari, where they met the giant tortoises in their natural habitat. So something we run here, for example, with also our partners, which are from the Galapagos National Park. And for longer-term initiatives, we also organize field trips, like telemetry field trips like this one, where the participants learn why and how to tag tortoises and how to download movement data. In the field, we collect feces as well, tortoise feces, but here we want not to look really at the plastic. We hope not to find them so much, but really to analyze their content, separate, identify seeds, so that we can learn about the diet of the tortoises, which is really a great way to get a grasp of the tortoise role as seed dispersers in the Galapagos ecosystems. And to get a better understanding of the importance of movement ecology, the students are challenged to map and analyze their own movement and compare them to the tortoises. Our health activities are among the favorites, I have to say. Teenagers and kids learn about tortoise anatomy with hands-on games and lab work as well, under the guidance of Ainhoa, who always emphasizes the One Health concept. And students also learn how to communicate and design their own projects. Here, for example, on the top image, you see some students who are conducting a survey at the local market to know about the perception of the farmers have about tortoises. And on the bottom image, you see the two girls on the left. They're actually getting some feedback from a tourist group on a poster they designed about antibiotic resistance in Galapagos tortoises. In 2020, because of the pandemic, all our in-person activities came to a complete stop. So as an alternative, we created sets of interactive virtual lessons with our colleagues from the Charles Darwin Foundation that we deliver to high school students via Zoom or WhatsApp, which we use a lot in Ecuador. And for primary schools, we designed an online home learning pack, both in English and in Spanish, that was also used by the students. And I guess as a COVID positive outcome, I guess we now have those tools that allow us to reach out to a wider audience and also to complement our in-person activities. And of course, more recently, we are really delighted about the publication of Tessa the Giant Tortoise, a crowdfunded storybook for younger children. And it tells about the migration of a female adult tortoise between the low and the highlands of Santa Cruz, of the challenges she encounters along her way, and how we can all help to protect Tessa and her kins. It's already been distributed in Galapagos to some of our key partners in education, like the local library, you see the local librarian here, and some community members, and it's being used by teachers, educators, and families in the islands, as well as in the UK right now. And it comes with a whole set or different sets of activities, both in English and Spanish as well, that are available online on the Discovering Galapagos platform, and that we will be very happy to tell you more about later on tonight. And so, in the name of the Galapagos Tortoise Movement Ecology Program, I had to say it, all of it, we would really like to thank GCT for their long-term and ongoing support. And I know and I would like to thank you all for your attention, and we will be happy to answer your questions a little bit later. Thank you.
Hola, mi nombre es Gislaine Mendoza Alcíbar, soy de la isla San Cristóbal, Galápagos, y dentro de la Fundación Charles Darwin trabajo en el proyecto de tortugas terrestres en el área de salud. Mi rol aquí es el de identificar y analizar mediante herramientas moleculares como es la PCR, virus específicos en las tortugas gigantes de Galápagos. Además de esto, apoyo en las otras aristas que tiene el proyecto, que es el programa de campo, las salidas de campo, y el programa de educación. GCT es uno de los donantes principales del proyecto y es quien ha estado financiando mi sueldo durante un año de trabajo, por lo cual me siento muy agradecida. Todos sabemos que Galápagos es único por su flora y fauna natural en el mundo. El hecho de poder conservar esta biodiversidad no solo da este punto, sino también es que damos la oportunidad a las nuevas generaciones a poder conocer este patrimonio natural. El trabajo que yo realizo ayuda a entender el estado de salud de las tortugas gigantes y de saber qué agentes infecciosos pueden generar posibles enfermedades a las tortugas. Desde esta forma que el año pasado pudimos descubrir nuevos virus en las tortugas gigantes de Galápagos, y esto es algo súper importante ya que hace pocos años atrás no se tenía información alguna de esto. Y nuestro entusiasmo va más allá, ya que no solamente queremos identificar en ciertas especies, sino en todas las especies existentes de tortugas. Asimismo, este año hemos empezado a muestrear otras especies endémicas para poder entender el comportamiento de estos virus. Uno de los resultados que he obtenido en mi trabajo es el hecho de haber descubierto nuevos virus en las tortugas gigantes de Galápagos. Asimismo, me llevo una experiencia bonita, ya que al momento de yo empezar a trabajar el año pasado, por coincidencia me tocó analizar muestras de la isla San Cristóbal, y fue, muestras de tortugas de la isla San Cristóbal, y esto fue súper chévere, ya que es de la isla de la cual yo vengo, y fue algo que me llenó de mucho orgullo el saber que estoy contribuyendo de esta forma en poder saber y entender el comportamiento de estos virus en la isla, de las especies de la isla que me vio crecer, ¿no? Asimismo, he aprendido a analizar células sanguíneas de las tortugas gigantes, y actualmente puedo reconocer de un individuo enfermo y de un individuo sano. Y esto es súper chévere porque hace pocos años atrás había información muy poca o irrelevante, y actualmente con nuestro equipo de trabajo se ha podido estandarizar esta información, ¿no? Antes esta información solo se podía saber en especies domésticas como gatos, perros, pero actualmente podemos saber si la tortuga pues, está atravesando un proceso infeccioso o si tiene anemia, y es algo súper importante tener esta información. El financiamiento me ha ayudado en mucho, ya que gracias a esto yo he podido tomar cursos para seguir capacitándome, para seguir ampliando mis conocimientos y eventualmente poderlos aplicar en el trabajo que estoy realizando. Además de esto, he podido ganar experiencia tanto teórica y práctica, y no solamente en el laboratorio, que es el área en el cual yo me desarrollo, sino también en el área de campo. El hecho de poder salir al campo y poder procesar las muestras de tortugas después es algo súper chévere, y es algo que no todos los científicos del laboratorio tienen acceso, y yo realmente me siento muy afortunada por poder tener este acceso. Bueno, pienso que debemos seguir las estrictas normas que como Parque Nacional se nos ha impuesto, el hecho de que los visitantes tengan el conocimiento antes de visitar las islas que deben de cumplir ciertos parámetros, ¿no? En este caso, como no tomar fotos con flash a las especies o seguir la cultura de reciclaje, y asimismo, ¿no? Para los colonos que estamos aquí, los que viven aquí en las islas, ser conscientes de los desechos que generamos, ser conscientes del reciclaje, asimismo con seguir las pescas responsables, respetar las vedas, como es el caso de la langosta o el pepino de mar. Y pienso que lo más importante también es la educación ambiental que se le da a los niños, ¿no? O sea, puedo decir que de la mitad de mis compañeros que me gradué en el colegio somos ahora científicos o estamos en estas áreas relacionadas de la ciencia, como es ingenieros ambientales, oceanógrafos, biólogos, biotecnólogos, como en mi caso. Y claro, todo esto yo pienso que tuvo mucho que ver con la educación que nos dieron desde pequeños, ¿no? Siempre estuvimos envueltos en educación ambiental, o cómo seguir la cultura del reciclaje, o cómo no usar plásticos y el respeto a la fauna silvestre. Entonces yo pienso que esto es un componente clave que se debe dar mucho apoyo a los niños, a la educación que se les brinda para, bueno, esto que implantarles esa semilla y que sigan estas carreras a futuro, ya que, bueno, es muy probable que sean los científicos del mañana. Entonces, eso.
It's wonderful to see the two areas that are covered there really cover two of the more significant species in terms of global recognition of the Galapagos. One is the giant tortoise, the other one's people. You know, one of the most important species in conservation is people. But it's also very important to look at the system as a whole, of course. And an ecosystem is many moving parts, you know, many of which rely wholly on each other. And that's biodiversity, really. So our next speaker is Jen Jones, who's head of programs for GCT. And she's going to talk about some of the threats to biodiversity in the islands.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you.
Thanks, Monty, and thanks to you all for being here this evening. So, the ocean, that's where we're going to now, into the marine environment. Lord Goldsmith stole a lot of my great facts, so just to reiterate a few of those, the ocean gives us so much. More than 50% of the oxygen we breathe comes from plants in the ocean, which just blows my mind still. We're so used to making that association with trees on land, but not so much in the ocean. And now, evidence is pointing towards better ocean protection is our best chance of limiting the negative impacts of climate change. And so protecting this important ecosystem is, well, more important than ever. I was lucky enough to be in the islands this summer for a really special research expedition. And this photo is taken in the west of Fernandina Island, in the very west of the archipelago. So this is looking out to the Pacific Ocean, where the next land is Asia. Almost half of our planet is covered with the ocean. And we were there to measure change. Next year is the 25th anniversary of the original Galapagos Marine Reserve, so we've heard the amazing news about the recent extension. But we have a long way to go to make sure that this biodiversity is protected in the long term. So we were there to measure what's changed in important species populations in that time, but also what's changed in the threats that we're seeing. So ocean biodiversity around Galapagos is particularly special. It's a hugely productive environment, and we can have a look at some of the science behind that. It's primarily due to these amazing currents that we see. So we can see there's warmer currents coming from the north, from Panama. So this allows more tropically adapted species to live in the archipelago. And then we also have what traditionally, as Monty pointed out, more polar adapted species can also live in the archipelago due to the cold Peruvian or Humboldt current and the cold deep water upwelling in the west where I was there, which really is that hub of marine productivity in the west where we were. So here's some shots, and this is who I was with. This is why I had this incredible experience. It was all thanks to Dr. Sylvia Earle and her NGO Mission Blue. So the PI for the trip was Alex Hearn, Dr. Alex Hearn, who we'll hear from in a video shortly. Unfortunately, he's presenting in an international shark conference in Spain this week, so couldn't be here. But Sylvia filled us with so much inspiration. Well, one thing which she always said is, like, we're not going to see what lives there, it's who lives there. Like, marine life takes on a completely different meaning when you're with someone like Sylvia. She's in her 80s, and she was doing extremely challenging dives, including night dives to find a really cool fish species called a red-lip batfish, and I know we've got some fans in the audience of that. I'll show you a photo if you've never seen one. But we were also with a group of young female researchers and national park rangers, and we learned so much from her and her experiences, especially what it was like for her coming up in ocean science in the 60s. And we were sharing stories about what has changed in that time and how many more, like Monty said, female scientists we've got running the show in many cases. But some of the challenges that we all do still face as well. I do think it's important to recognize that there's still some work to be done for things to be truly equal. But you can see in that picture up there was a submarine on this vessel. So I knew that before I was going to be on it, but I never thought that I would get the opportunity to be in it. But Sylvia, being Sylvia, wanted us all to experience this environment. So let me show you a little bit of what we saw. So this is 200 meters depth. And the amount of biodiversity we saw was stunning. All of us were incredibly shocked, actually. This piece of seafloor has never been surveyed, so we are the only humans who saw this, who've ever seen this with human eyeballs. You can see corals, you can see sea fans, we can see sponges, you could see many fish, juvenile fish, we could see crustaceans, mollusks, all kinds of animals that all of us as marine biologists, every night we came back to the boat, we watched the 2 or 3 hours of sub footage all together, completely wrapped. Better than any series you could get on, well, any provider. Honestly, we were just, everything was just like there, and Sylvia would be right up to the screen, being like, this is this, this is this. It was absolutely phenomenal. Now, it's so special to have this deep-sea submersible in Galapagos that we had a special visit from the Minister of Environment, Gustavo Manrique. And so he went down in the sub with Sylvia, and he was learning all about the challenges that we face, particularly in deep-sea conservation. So there's a lot of threats of potential deep-sea mining exploration. There's issues of destructive fishing, not here in the Marine Reserve, but more generally. So he came down with Sylvia, and look at this phenomenal experience that they had.
Can you do it with your hand? Oh, he's right over your head.
Oh my God. Oh my God. This just, it didn't happen right now. Unbelievable.
He tried to kiss you. Can you imagine what just happened?
It tried to kiss him. Like, can you imagine, like, how incredible that experience must have been? And although we were all incredibly jealous that he saw a sunfish, mola mola, down there at 80 meters, there isn't anybody we would have rather had that experience. To really see, like, that magic of the deep sea and how important it is for us to keep on this quest to continue protecting more and raising the case study of the great stuff that is happening in Galapagos on the international stage to try and inspire more places to follow the example. So the health of this deep sea biodiversity, which we were learning about, really impacts, well, everything else that we see. This is a more typical reef system that's linked with the health of the deep sea. And then going on to the terrestrial system as well. This is an image from one of our annual drone surveys, which is looking at populations of marine iguanas, unfortunately also looking at plastics washing up. But here you can see again, this is in the west, in Fernandina, this extraordinary productivity where we can see turtles, sea lions, and these thousands of iguanas. So we can see that this part is very, very productive environment that is a priority to protect. So we've already heard about this new expansion. And we've heard about the ambitions to support countries to get to 30% protection by 2030. And that's what we're dedicated to doing now. So how can we support the Ecuadorian government? How can we support the local communities to make this a reality? But what we need is multi-levels of protection. We need it to be effective. We need that vertical protection from the shorelines to the deep sea. We also need the geographic spatial protection as well. And we need a holistic view of how we're tackling threats because things like climate change, fishing, plastics, all interact with each other. What you can see on this animation here is some whale sharks that have been tagged. And this is an important part of what we're doing currently, is trying to understand more about the migration paths of whale sharks and other shark species too, and to try and understand how particularly they're crossing over these huge industrial fishing zones. And we've seen this happen already. Tags are lost fairly frequently. We can see that a tag that was showing normal swimming behavior suddenly is just going very steady in a straight line where it's most likely landed on a boat from fishing activity, etc. So yeah, this is the takeaway really. We need ocean protection at all levels, and this is a truly global effort to make this happen. So one of the issues we are talking about this evening is that of plastic pollution. So this photo, I hope it's okay to you then, was taken by Anne, who you just heard from, who's lucky enough to go to Tortuga Bay on many mornings for a nice walk. Now, one morning, she collected all of these bottles in just one very small area of the beach, which is particularly unusual. There's like 55 of them, I think it was, something like that. And they all look fairly new. So it seems like they've been in the environment not for a very long time and have probably entered quite close to the islands as well. So that's another piece of what we're doing in this research, is trying to trace where are the plastics coming from that are washing up in Galapagos, who is responsible, and then to design solutions of what we can do about it so that we don't end up continuing to see this increase. We find all kinds of items on the shores. We have a really awesome collaboration with the University of Exeter. Many of the team are here tonight, so please go to the plastics stand in the Education Centre if you've not been there yet to hear what the very, very latest in this research is. Oh yeah, this video here shows you what Lord Goldsmith was talking about. So with this beach that on the surface looks like there isn't really anything going on, you can see when we sieve the sand and it passes through with the water, all these bits of plastic coming out. And they're the ones we can see. So plastic continues to break down into smaller, smaller particles. And the reason why we care about that is because the smaller the plastic is, the easier it is for more animals to ingest it. And so that accumulation becomes more of a risk. But and the positive thing, as I said, this collaboration with the University of Exeter has grown and grown, and thanks to support from the UK government through the GCRF funding and an incredible long-term supporter of our State Evolution Education Trust, we've managed to really boost this effort for plastics and take what we'd started in Galapagos at a relatively small scale to now be working on the regional scale. So we have activities in Ecuador, in the mainland, as well as the islands, in Peru, and in Chile as well. And so we're really excited about how we can continue to grow these efforts collaboratively. And can I just say, this group is so inspirational that I feel so proud to be a part of them. And it's all about the people, like Monty said. We've got some incredible people who are so passionate about solving this issue that although it can be a bit depressing at times, or very depressing at times, we do have a chance to do something about it. And there is a growing political will to support this too all around the world. And the main thing it's all leading up to is Global Plastics Treaty, which is something which we're very keen to support, as we heard from the ambassador earlier. How can we support this kind of connection between policy, between research, and between the local community to really make solutions that are going to last in the long term? So I'm going to leave my bit here. She is a very, very special whale shark. So I met her in July, and this is the first whale shark I've ever seen. I've worked at DST nearly 12 years and been raising lots of funds for this species, and I was already well sold on why we need to protect them. But seeing her in real life was just, I'm getting chills just thinking about it again. It was such a phenomenal experience. And apparently she was a baby. She was 7 meters long, which when you're in the ocean with seems enormous, but they can get up to 12 meters in Galapagos. So she was only a baby, really. But I had this incredible experience with 2 amazing scientists who I'm lucky enough to call good friends as well, and they'll be presenting in videos now. So as I said, they're both in the Shark Conference in Spain at the moment presenting their work. But Dr. Alex Hearn, he is a professor at the University of San Francisco de Quito, which is one of our main partners. He also heads up Migromar, which is a group of regional researchers looking at migratory megafauna. So that's what happens with whales, with turtles, with sharks. And Diana Pazmiño, who is an uber inspiration to me. She is from Isabella Islands in Galapagos. It's a very small community of only about 2,000 people, 3,000 people. And she is now a real leading figure in genetics, and she studies something called environmental DNA, which is a new, very cool technique to measure ocean biodiversity very, very quickly using new tech. So I think she's going to cover a bit of that in her video. But yeah, I will hand over to Alex, who I think, before he starts, we're going to experience a little bit of what it's like maybe diving up there in Darwin and Wolf in the north of the archipelago, where we were lucky to meet that whale shark.
I'm Alex Hearn, and I'm a professor of marine biology at Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. And I'm also a founding member of Migramar, a network of scientists who are studying marine migratory species across the eastern tropical Pacific and how to protect them. The biodiversity of Galapagos and its surrounding waters is truly unique. And it's not just about the fact that we have species there that are nowhere else in the world, but also the sheer abundance of life in the waters. One of the groups of species that are under most threat, probably globally, are sharks. And my work is focused on trying to understand how the Galapagos Marine Reserve and other marine reserves regionally help protect these highly migratory species. Over the last 15 years, we've made some amazing discoveries. We found, for example, that whale sharks parade through the islands each year, and it's mostly large females, and they head thousands of kilometers offshore and then back again and ending up off the coast of northern Peru and southern Ecuador. We also found out on a slightly smaller scale the first hammerhead shark nursery ground, only 40-minute boat ride away from our offices in San Cristobal. But most of the work that we do does involve tracking sharks, looking at where they move and how they move. And we identified a particularly important area that we've dubbed the swimway, and that's the underwater mountain ridge that links Galapagos and Cocos Islands at 700 kilometers to the northeast. And this area we're really trying to protect. So we were really grateful that the President of Ecuador declared the Hermandad Marine Reserve, which protects some of this migratory area, earlier this year. The partnership with Galapagos Conservation Trust covers a number of different aspects. So GCT has a team of fundraisers that work with us, the researchers, to develop proposals and make sure that we can do the work in the field. We're also all on the same page in terms of generating the capacity here in country. So a lot of my students really took their first steps both in the water and in their professional fields thanks to support from GCT. And finally, there's the outreach. And really, I think one of the most amazing products that we've put together was Marty the Hammerhead Shark, which is a book that allows us to, through storytelling, generate ocean stewardship in communities both in Galapagos and along the coast of Ecuador and Costa Rica. Despite the recent successes, there is still so much more we need to do. We're still learning about this fragile ecosystem, but it goes beyond the biology. We need to develop a shared vision as to what we think fisheries should look like inside and outside the marine reserve. We need to support strengthened governments to prevent the illegal wildlife trade and illegal longlining. We need to continue to invest in creating the next generation of leaders. And finally, and most importantly, we need to look beyond Galapagos, out into the exclusive economic zone and even out into international waters, because what happens out there affects us in here.
Hello, my name is Diana Pazmiño. I am a faculty at Universidad San Francisco de Quito, or USFQ, but I am also a researcher in the Galapagos Science Center in San Cristobal, Galapagos. I have a few projects here. One of them is trying to understand population structure and genetic connectivity of different elasmobranch species in Galapagos and in the region. And I have a special love for rays, all the way from giant mantas to other smaller ray species, but I also run some community engagement projects. And I have been working with the Galapagos Conservation Trust for a few years now. They are supporting both the science part of my work, but also the community engagement projects. We work with small kids here, aged 8 to 12, local girls from the islands, and that's probably the most exciting part of my job. The long-term protection of the Galapagos is a shared responsibility. I think the first step is understanding what we have and understanding what our priorities are here in Galapagos. We have already discovered some amazing things in elasmobranch, especially where we think they can move so far, they are highly mobile. We are seeing that many of these species rather choose to stay in Galapagos, and some of these can potentially be resident population, which means we need to pay a lot of attention on how we implement monitoring and conservation actions to make sure we're protecting them in the long term. We have identified species that were misidentified in the past, so we have come up with an accurate list of the diversity of the elasmobranch here in Galapagos. And if we think of the education side, we are encouraging little girls to become part of what we do in the Science Center, to have a first-hand experience of what does it mean to be a researcher, what does it mean to be a scientist, and presenting them with role models so they know there's an option for them in science if they're willing to do that in the future. Some of these results were seen already. Some of these girls already thinking that they do want to become a biologist or an ecologist. Some of them that didn't want to adventure into the water before because they were scared of the animals and because they didn't know how to swim or how to snorkel, are now very, very excited of a career that involves the ocean, and that's very exciting for us.
Estoy emocionada porque es mi primera vez en un barco. Hola, me llamo Juliet y estoy muy emocionada porque hoy día estamos conociendo sobre las mantarrayas. Chao. Hola, mi nombre es Amy, estoy muy contenta porque vimos una raya. Bebé, chao.
The support coming from the Galapagos Conservation Trust is amazing. Not only is funding that allows us to go and run all these field activities, so money that allows us to hire a local fisherman to go and to take samples and to do the monitorings, but it's also a support that comes in many different ways. Me as a scientist, I'm not trained in education, but I'm adventuring into the world, and I'm receiving a lot of support in terms of how to build resources for education and how to make the activities that I do with the girls very interactive, very, very exciting for them. So that is amazing. And also the fact that the Galapagos Conservation Trust has this strong network and these strong connections with institutions and with people around the world that gets interested in what we do is amazing, because often they help us get in touch with these people, and then that ends up in many different things. People coming and supporting the work, people that's helping us illustrate the different species, people helping us in many, many different ways. We have trained over 70 people here, from fishermen, farmers, taxi drivers, tourist guides, and this has been thanks to the support of the GCT as well. These people is now helping us collect data in the field. These people is helping us analyze some of these samples in the laboratories, and now they are getting also in the data analysis bit of that. So that's very, very exciting, and that's something we appreciate very much.
Well, thank you, Jen, and thank you, Diane. And that's the last of the formal presentations, really. And what we're going to do is we're not going to do a Q&A because all of the speakers are going to be they're going to be in the lobby, essentially. So do feel free to come up and have a chat. And they'll be more than delighted to speak to you. Can I just ask that we give one last round of applause for the extraordinary group of speakers we've just seen, the amazing work that they're doing. So. Now, the last thing I'll say before we close for the evening is, having been out to the islands many times, and I've been fortunate enough sometimes to accompany the scientists out in the field, this is hard work. There is a danger when you look at the videos and the pictures, as it's all sugar white sand, and hey, there's a whale shark, and oh, look, a finch. It's actually brutal. It's a really, really tough environment to work in. So it's a real monument to them. They do this work with such vigor. They're the sort of gladiators of conservation out there, really. It's wonderful. And one of the reasons it's so significant is I've been visiting the island for 20 years now. And let me tell you, 100% it is working. They are getting results. They are engineering change just by the force of personality, by the power of the data they're gathering. And people are really sitting up and starting to take notice. And that's the significance of this work, really. So there's 4 ways to support the work. One is donate to our biodiversity appeal, and do feel free to go and have a chat at the stand there. The other one is to become a GCT member. The other one is buy a raffle ticket for the chance to win the Galapagos cruise. Interestingly, with these raffle tickets, you are guaranteed to win if you buy one. It's quite an unusual system that we have. You are 100% guaranteed to win. So basically, when you buy the ticket, buy a sun hat and sunglasses at the same time and get ready for the cruise. And the last one is just a little thing for tonight is to remember tonight, buy Galapagos merchandise at the merch stand. Everyone who leaves is patted down to make sure you have a little stuffed hammerhead on you or an iguana or something like that. So thank you so much again for coming out. Ambassador, thank you so much for your continued support of the GCT, and have a safe trip home. Oh. Sorry, Jim would just like to have a quick final word, sorry.
Your Excellency and everybody here who are fans of Galapagos, I just felt, as a Galapagos guardian, that I wanted to encourage you a little. But I'm going to start with a negative. Our late Queen, when she was born, came to a planet with 1.8 billion people on it. She died just before 8 billion people populated this planet. And that, to my way of thinking, is a big issue when it comes to a little corner of it called the Galapagos. We must understand the bigger world as well as the smaller one. Now, there are so many young faces here tonight, and interestingly, as I walked up from South Ken Station this evening, I was surprised to see, I shouldn't have been surprised, I was surprised to see so many young people getting their graduation with their gowns and all the rest of it. And I was horrified to realize that 53 years ago, to the exact date almost, I was doing that. So time is a big thing, and we have to understand that time is not on our side. I've been lucky enough to visit Galapagos, and I was blown away by it. And I therefore became a Galapagos guardian. And I hope I've done my little bit in the interim to finance Galapagos Conservation Trust, because they are so damned good at it. This is a chance for you, though. Please, this evening and onwards, put your own hand in your pocket and dig deeper than your pocket is, because there's down the bottom there's some loose change. We want it. Galapagos Conservation Trust needs it. And in particular, I would hope you will do your very best towards the Floreana appeal, because this reconstitution of the island, getting rid of the invasive species and that sort of thing, is going to be a real leader if we can do it. I had some involvement a time back with the South Georgia Heritage Trust, who got rid of the rats on South Georgia, and I've been lucky enough to see the result, and it was fabulous. It is fabulous. So please, it's a big job we've got to do. There's a big benefit to be had from it. It's worthwhile, and your relationship with plankton has never been closer. Thank you.